If he does not come through those doors in the next 5 minutes, I am not hiding from what he did. Ethan Parker heard his own voice before he fully understood that he meant every word. He stood inside a private wedding suite high above Manhattan, dressed in the midnight blue suit Ryan Bennett had helped him choose 3 months earlier, while nearly 200 guests waited beyond the ballroom doors. His phone felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Ryan's message was still glowing on the screen. I cannot do this. I am sorry. Please do not wait for me. 4 years together had been reduced to 3 sentences. Ethan read them again, searching for some hidden explanation that might transform them into a misunderstanding. Nothing changed. The wedding coordinator, Melissa, stood nearby with professional calm and unmistakable sympathy. There's a service elevator at the end of this hallway, she said gently. We can get you downstairs without anyone seeing you. Ethan looked toward the narrow corridor behind her. The offer was sensible. He could leave through the hotel kitchen, take a cab home, close the curtains, and let somebody else explain why the ceremony never happened. For several seconds, escape sounded merciful. Then music drifted faintly through the ballroom doors. His mother was sitting in the second row. His friends had flown in from California, Texas, and Florida. People had rearranged work schedules, bought plane tickets, reserved hotel rooms, and come because Ethan and Ryan had asked them to witness a promise. Ryan had chosen not to face them. Ethan refused to disappear with him. Open the doors, he said. Melissa searched his face. You do not have to do this. I know. Ethan straightened his silver tie with fingers that were almost steady. That is why I am doing it. The ballroom doors opened. Warm chandelier lights spilled into the corridor, followed by the sight of flowers, white tablecloths, champagne glasses, and rows of familiar faces. Conversations faded one by one as guests noticed that Ethan was standing alone. At the far end of the aisle waited an empty place where Ryan should have been. Ethan felt every pair of eyes turn toward him. For one terrible second, shame told him to run. Instead, he stepped forward, then another step. The room became so quiet that he could hear the soft rhythm of his shoes against the floor. Some guests looked confused. Others already understood. Ethan kept his shoulders straight and walked the entire aisle alone. Near the back of the ballroom sat a man Ethan recognized immediately, although they had never been introduced. Adrian Cole, 39 years old, an alpha whose name circulated through New York's most guarded business circles in lowered voices. People call him a mafia boss when they thought he could not hear them. Ethan had expected someone with that reputation to look coldly amused by another man's humiliation. Adrian did not. While everyone else kept glancing toward the empty place beside Ethan, Adrian's gray eyes remained fixed on Ethan himself. Ethan reached the front and turned toward the guests. His hands wanted to shake, so he loosely folded them together. Ryan will not be joining us today, he said. A whisper moved through the ballroom. Ethan swallowed and continued. The wedding is canceled. I learned that a few minutes ago, so I do not have a better explanation to give you. His mother started to rise, but Ethan gave her a small, reassuring nod. He was not all right. He did not need to pretend otherwise, but he was still standing. Then someone near the center of the room began to ask what Ryan had said. Ethan froze. Before he could answer, a chair moved quietly near the back. Adrian Cole rose to his feet, and suddenly the attention of the entire ballroom shifted toward the alpha everyone feared. Adrian Cole did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He has already told you everything you are entitled to know. The unfinished question disappeared into the silence. Ethan stared toward the back of the ballroom, unsure whether he was more surprised by Adrian speaking or by what he had chosen to say. Adrian remained beside his chair rather than approaching the aisle. There was no dramatic display, no attempt to take control of the room, only a boundary stated with such certainty that nobody seemed interested in challenging it. Ethan looked at the guests again. A few lowered their eyes. Others suddenly became fascinated by their champagne glasses. For the first time since the doors had opened, Ethan felt as though he could breathe without performing his heartbreak for everyone around him. Thank you, he said, directing the words toward the entire room as much as toward Adrian. The reception has already been paid for. The food is prepared, the cake is here, and many of you traveled a long way. Please stay if you want to. Eat, talk, enjoy the afternoon. I just cannot do that with you today. His mother looked ready to follow him, but Ethan gave her another small nod. They would talk later, privately. Right now, he needed to leave on his own feet. He walked back down the same aisle, passing the flowers and carefully arranged tables that had looked like pieces of a perfect future that morning. Nobody stopped him. When he reached the hallway, Melissa quietly asked whether he wanted the service elevator after all. Ethan glanced toward it and shook his head. Regular elevator. It was a small decision, but he needed it. He loosened his silver tie as he crossed the quiet hotel corridor. Behind him, the ballroom doors opened and closed. Ethan expected his mother or one of his friends. Instead, Adrian emerged and stopped about 8 feet away. Mr. Parker. Ethan turned. Up close, Adrian looked exactly as intimidating as his reputation suggested. Tall, controlled, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's first car. Yet his expression contained no pity. Mr. Cole, I have a car downstairs. If you would like transportation home, it is available. Ethan almost laughed at the strange formality of the offer. No, thank you. All right. Ethan blinked. That was it. No insistence. No explanation about safety. No alpha certainty that Adrian knew what Ethan needed better than Ethan did. You are not going to argue? Adrian's eyebrow lifted slightly. You said no. The elevator chimed before Ethan could answer. He stepped inside, then turned as the doors began closing. Something made him reach toward the control and stop them. Adrian was still standing exactly where Ethan had left him. Why did you do that in there? Ethan asked. Do what? Stop that question. Adrian considered his answer. Because you had already answered the only question that mattered. The ceremony was canceled. The reason Ryan made his decision belongs to you until you decide otherwise. Ethan tightened his grip around his phone. You do not even know me. That does not make your privacy less yours. Ethan had no response. Adrian gave him a slight nod and stepped back, making it clear he would not keep him there. Ethan released the elevator button. As the doors narrowed, he saw Adrian turn toward the ballroom rather than follow him. The elevator began descending. Ethan looked at his reflection in the polished metal doors. The suit was still perfect. The silver tie was slightly loose. His eyes looked exhausted. His phone still held the message that had erased the future he expected to have by sunset. Yet another sentence now occupied his thoughts. You said no. For years with Ryan had taught Ethan to think love meant building decisions together. One afternoon with Adrian had shown him something he had not realized he was missing. A decision could belong entirely to him, and someone could respect it without demanding a reason. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, Ethan still felt abandoned, embarrassed, and uncertain about tomorrow. But beneath all of that was one unexpected thought he could not dismiss. The alpha everyone in that ballroom seemed afraid of had been the only person who had not tried to tell Ethan what he should do next. 1 week later, Ethan almost turned around before entering the charity fundraiser. He stood outside the Midtown ballroom in a dark navy jacket, listening to the quiet movement of guests beyond the doors, and hated that another elegant room could make his stomach tighten. He had promised months earlier that he would attend on behalf of the community housing program his company supported. Canceling would have been understandable. That was precisely why Ethan refused to do it. He entered. Within minutes, he discovered that nearly everyone seemed to know what had happened. Some guests politely avoided the subject. Others watched him with a careful sympathy people reserved for someone they believed might fall apart without warning. Then a woman Ethan had met twice touched his sleeve and said, "You are incredibly brave for coming out tonight." Ethan forced a smile. "I came to a fundraiser, not climb Mount Everest." She laughed uncertainly. Ethan excused himself and headed toward the nearest exit. He was 6 feet from the doors when he noticed Adrian Cole beside a tall window overlooking Manhattan. Adrian was speaking with 2 older businessmen, his charcoal suit immaculate, his expression composed. Their eyes met. Ethan expected Adrian to approach. Instead, Adrian gave him one small nod and returned to his conversation. Ethan stopped. The exit remained directly ahead. Adrian had seen him preparing to leave and had done absolutely nothing to influence him. for reasons Ethan could not fully explain, that made leaving feel less necessary. He turned toward the silent auction displays instead. 20 minutes later, Ethan was examining a framed photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge when Adrian appeared at the neighboring display. Staying, Adrian asked, "Apparently, I make questionable decisions in expensive rooms." Adrian studied the photograph. "That describes most charity auctions." Ethan laughed before he could stop himself. Adrian glanced at him, and something almost resembling surprise crossed his face. "What?" Ethan asked. "Nothing. That was definitely something. I did not realize you laughed." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "We have met exactly once, Cole." It was not a particularly festive afternoon. Adrian accepted the correction with a slight nod. "Fair point." The ease of the exchange unsettled Ethan more than formality would have. Adrian did not ask about Ryan. He did not mention the wedding until Ethan finally said, "Everyone keeps looking at me like I survived a natural disaster." People become uncomfortable when they cannot repair something with a sentence. Ethan looked at him. "Can you?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "Good." Ethan turned toward the photograph again. "Because I am tired of hearing that everything happens for a reason." Adrian remained silent. That silence invited honesty rather than demanding it. "The worst part is not even that Ryan left," Ethan admitted. "It is realizing how much of my future depended on him staying. Apartment plans, holidays, schedules, everything. I thought I knew what my life would look like 5 years from now, because I thought I knew what he would choose." Adrian's gray eyes remained steady. "And now?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Now, I'm wondering why his choice had that much power over how I see myself." "That sounds like an unpleasant question." "It is. Probably still worth asking." Someone across the ballroom called Adrian's name. He glanced toward them, then back at Ethan. "Do you want me to stay here?" Ethan was surprised again. "Not I will stay. Not you should not be alone." "A question." "For 5 more minutes," Ethan said. 5 minutes. Adrian remained beside him. He did not move closer or block the room from Ethan's view. 5 minutes became 10. By the time Adrian finally left to speak with the waiting guests, Ethan looked toward the exit and realized he no longer wanted it. For the first time since the wedding, staying somewhere had not felt like proving anything to anyone. Ethan picked up a glass of sparkling water and returned to the fundraiser, because he chose to. Across the ballroom, Adrian noticed he did not smile like a man who had won something. He simply nodded once, and Ethan understood that somehow made the moment matter more. When Ethan returned to his Manhattan apartment that night, the silence felt different from the quiet he had left that morning. For the first time in a week, he had spent several hours in a crowded room without feeling defined by the wedding. He changed into a gray sweater and dark pants, poured himself a glass of water, and had just placed his phone on the kitchen counter when the screen illuminated. Ryan Bennett. Ethan stared until the call ended. 30 seconds later, the building intercom sounded. "Mr. Parker," the doorman said, "Mr. Bennett is downstairs. He is asking for 5 minutes." Ethan closed his eyes. A week ago, he had imagined Ryan returning almost every hour. Now that Ryan was actually downstairs, Ethan felt no relief, only uncertainty. "Send him up." When the knock came, Ethan opened the door, but did not step aside immediately. Ryan looked exhausted. His coat was damp from the cold evening air, and the confidence Ethan had known for 4 years seemed absent. 5 minutes, Ethan said. Ryan nodded. 5 minutes. Ethan allowed him inside, but remained near the doorway. Ryan stood several feet away. "I am sorry." Ethan waited. "I know that is not enough," Ryan continued. "I kept telling myself I was ready. Every time I had doubts, I thought admitting them meant I was failing you. Then the wedding became real, and I panicked." Ethan's expression tightened. "It was real when we signed a contract with the venue. It was real when my mother flew in. It was real when nearly 200 people sat down waiting for us." Ryan lowered his eyes. "I know. No, Ryan. You know now. I knew while I was standing there alone." Ryan accepted the words without arguing. That made Ethan angrier and somehow sadder. It would have been easier if Ryan had arrived defensive or dismissive. Instead, he looked like a man who finally understood the cost of his fear. "I handled everything wrong," Ryan said. "I cannot change what happened. But 4 years cannot mean nothing because I failed on one terrible day. Ethan looked away. 4 years did not mean nothing. That was precisely the problem. There had been Sunday breakfasts, vacations, arguments over furniture, family dinners, and hundreds of ordinary evenings Ethan had once believed were building towards something permanent. "What do you want?" Ethan asked. "Another chance. Not another wedding. Not tomorrow. I want to rebuild this slowly, if you will let me." Ethan remained silent. Ryan reached into his coat pocket, then stopped before removing anything. "Your ring is still in my apartment. I can bring it tomorrow." "Do not." Ryan froze. Ethan looked at his empty left hand. "I do not want it tomorrow." The final word escaped before Ethan could reconsider it. Ryan heard the difference. He did not exploit it. All right. His 5 minutes were nearly over. At the door, Ryan turned once. "I loved you before that day, Ethan. I still do. I was afraid. That is not excuse. What I did." Ethan opened the door. "I know." After Ryan left, Ethan remained there until the elevator carried him away. Then he walked into the living room and looked around at the apartment they had once planned to leave together. For a moment, he imagined Ryan returning with the ring. He imagined telling everyone they had reconciled. He imagined the wedding becoming an embarrassing story with a happier ending instead of the day an Alpha walked away from him. The thought was comforting. That frightened him. Ethan looked down at his empty hand and remembered Adrian standing 8 feet away in the hotel corridor after Ethan said no. Then he remembered the fundraiser and Adrian asking whether Ethan wanted him to stay. Ryan had returned asking Ethan to rebuild their future. Adrian had never asked Ethan for anything. Ethan suddenly understood that the question was no longer whether Ryan deserved another chance. The harder question was whether Ethan truly wanted Ryan back, or whether he only wanted to erase the feeling of being the Omega who had been left behind. 2 days later, Ethan sat across from Adrian in a quiet coffee shop on West 44th Street, watching morning traffic slide past the window while his untouched coffee cooled between his hands. Adrian had arrived exactly on time, wearing a charcoal overcoat and the same unreadable expression that made strangers instinctively give him space. Ethan had spent 10 minutes discussing work before finally saying, "Ryan came to my apartment." Adrian did not tense or ask what Ryan wanted. How did that go? He apologized. He admitted he panicked. He wants another chance. Adrian waited. Ethan frowned. "That is all you have to say? What would you like me to say?" "I do not know. Something useful." A trace of amusement touched Adrian's expression. "That significantly narrows nothing." Ethan leaned back. "What would you do if I went back to him?" Adrian's gaze remained steady. "Nothing. Nothing. It is your relationship." Ethan stared at him. "You cannot possibly think going back is a good idea." "I did not say that." "Then tell me it is a bad one." Adrian was silent for a moment. "No." Frustration rose in Ethan's chest. "Why not?" "Because you do not need my permission to leave Ryan, and you do not need my permission to return to him." Ethan looked toward the window. "That sounds very reasonable when you say it like that." "You seem disappointed." "Maybe I wanted someone else to make this easier." Adrian's expression softened, but his answer did not. "Then I will be doing exactly what you were trying to stop doing." Ethan turned back. Adrian continued, "If Ryan decided your future when he left, and I decide your future by telling you not to take him back, what changed?" Ethan became still. Around them, cups touched saucers, and an espresso machine hissed behind the counter. "You think I let alphas make my decisions?" "I think you spent 4 years building a future that depended heavily on one man's choices." "That is not the same thing." Ethan looked down at his hands. "Part of me wants him back." Adrian nodded without visible judgment. "Why?" "Because if he comes back, maybe what happened stops meaning what everyone thinks it means." "And what do you think everyone thinks?" Ethan hated how quickly the answer arrived. "That he looked at me and decided I was not worth staying for." Adrian's gray eyes sharpened. Would Ryan returning make that belief true in reverse? Ethan frowned. "What? If his leaving proves you have no value, does his returning suddenly create it?" Ethan said nothing. The question landed somewhere deeper than he wanted it to. His phone vibrated against the table. Ryan's message appeared on the screen. "Can we meet Saturday? Just talk." Ethan stared at it. "He wants to meet." Adrian did not glance at the phone. Do you want to? I think I need to. Then meet him. Ethan studied Adrian's face, searching for disappointment, jealousy, anything that would tell him what Adrian wanted. There was something there, carefully restrained, but Adrian refused to turn it into pressure. And if I choose him? Ethan asked. Adrian held his gaze. Then choose him because you want Ryan, Ethan. Not because Ryan finally came back and made you feel chosen. Ethan looked down at the message again. For days he'd been asking whether Ryan deserved forgiveness. Sitting across from the Alpha, everyone feared. Ethan finally understood there was another question he had avoided completely. If nobody were watching, if there were no abandoned ceremony to repair and no humiliation to erase, would he still choose the man who had returned? Saturday arrived under a gray Manhattan sky, and Ethan reached the small restaurant near Bryant Park 10 minutes early. He had chosen the place because it belonged to neither his life with Ryan nor the strange new space Adrian had begun occupying in his thoughts. When Ryan arrived, he looked nervous but hopeful. Ethan immediately understood why this conversation had frightened him all week. Ryan was not a stranger who had hurt him. He was still the man Ethan had loved for 4 years. Thank you for coming, Ryan said as he sat across from him. Ethan folded his hands around a cup of coffee. I came to listen. Ryan nodded. Then I will start with what I should have admitted months ago. I was scared long before that morning. Every time we discussed the wedding, the apartment, even where we would spend Thanksgiving, I felt like my entire future was becoming permanent. Instead of telling you, I kept pretending I was fine. Until pretending became impossible. Yes. Ryan looked down. I thought leaving would give me time to understand what I wanted. Instead, I understood what I had done to you. Ethan watched rain begin tracing thin lines down the window. And now you want to rebuild everything. Slowly. Only if you want that too. There was no excuse hidden inside the answer. No demand. That made Ethan remember Sunday mornings with Ryan, grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator, road trips, birthdays, and ordinary evenings that had once felt permanent. He could imagine trying again. He could imagine Ryan returning the ring. He could imagine their friends eventually describing the canceled ceremony as a terrible mistake they had overcome. For several seconds, that future felt almost comforting. Then Ethan asked himself the question Adrian had left with him. If nobody knew what had happened, would he still want Ryan back? The answer arrived quietly. I forgive you, Ethan said. Ryan looked up, hope appearing immediately. Ethan continued before that hope could become a promise. But I do not want to rebuild our relationship. Ryan's expression changed. Is this because of Cole? No. Ethan's answer was immediate. Adrian never told me to leave you. Actually, he refused to tell me what to do. Then why? Ethan looked through the window toward Bryant Park. Because I realized I was trying to repair the wrong thing. I thought if you came back, then that day would stop meaning I was the Omega who was not worth staying for. Ryan opened his mouth, but Ethan gently shook his head. I know you did not leave because I lacked value. Your fear belonged to you. But I made your decision about me, and then I almost made your return about me too. Ryan was silent. Ethan felt sadness, but underneath it was something steadier. I do not need you to choose me again, so I can believe I was worth choosing the first time. Ryan's eyes lowered. I really did love you. I know. I loved you too. That truth no longer required a future together. They sat quietly for another minute before Ryan stood. I'm sorry, Ethan. I know. Ryan left without asking again. Ethan remained until his coffee cooled, then stepped outside. The rain had softened into mist. He walked several blocks toward Bryant Park before taking out his phone. Adrian's name was there. Ethan's thumb hovered over it. Call would have been easy. Adrian would probably answer. Instead, Ethan put the phone back in his coat pocket. He bought another coffee from a corner shop and entered the park alone. For the first time since the ceremony, being alone did not feel like someone had failed to arrive. It felt like Ethan had arrived for himself. 3 weeks later, Ethan was walking through Central Park beside the man most people in New York would have expected to travel everywhere behind tinted windows. You realize there was a coffee shop 2 blocks from where we started, Adrian said. Ethan lifted his paper cup. That coffee is terrible. We walked 6 blocks for this one. Exactly. Civilization survives because people have standards. Adrian gave him a skeptical look. Ethan laughed, and Adrian unexpectedly stopped walking. What? Ethan asked. Nothing. You keep saying that when it is clearly something. Adrian resumed walking. You laugh differently now. Ethan considered that. The observation should have felt too personal, but somehow it did not. Maybe I have better material. You have been making fun of me for 15 minutes. Like I said, better material. A small smile appeared on Adrian's face. Their friendship had developed without either of them naming it. Coffee became occasional lunches. Lunches became walks, and neither man treated the meetings as obligations. Adrian never asked what happened with Ryan until Ethan chose to tell him. When Ethan finally did, Adrian only said, "Are you comfortable with your decision?" Ethan had answered yes. Adrian had accepted it. That afternoon, they reached the cafe Ethan preferred and took a table beside the window. Their conversation wandered from work to terrible restaurant music before Adrian became unusually quiet. "There is something I should tell you," he said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous. Years ago, I trusted an Omega who betrayed that trust." Ethan waited. "Afterward, I decided keeping distance from Omegas was simpler. I told myself they were unpredictable, emotionally manipulative, and dangerous to trust." Ethan's expression hardened. "That is a convenient way to blame an entire group for what one person did." "Yes," Adrian answered so quickly that Ethan paused. "You agree?" "Completely." Adrian looked toward the window. "I was angry, and prejudice was easier than admitting I had trusted the wrong individual. Eventually the rule became habit." Ethan studied him. "And then you met me?" Adrian turned back. "Do not misunderstand. You are not some exceptional Omega who proved everyone else wrong." Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly. Adrian continued. "You made me examine something I should have examined years ago. The problem was never Omegas. The problem was my judgment." Ethan had expected justification. Instead, Adrian had offered accountability. "You know, admitting you were wrong is going to damage your terrifying reputation." "I will survive." Ethan smiled. Barely. They finished their coffee and stepped back into the cold afternoon. At the familiar corner where they usually separated, Adrian slowed. Ethan did too. For weeks, Adrian had allowed every meeting to end without asking when the next one would happen. Suddenly, Ethan realized he was tired of waiting for coincidence and convenient schedules. "Are you free Thursday night?" Adrian looked genuinely surprised. Ethan almost enjoyed that more than he should have. "Possibly." That sounded suspiciously like a mafia boss checking his mysterious calendar. "What did you have in mind?" "There's a restaurant in Greenwich Village I want to try." Adrian remained silent for half a second too long. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Cole, I'm inviting you to dinner. Try to keep up." The surprise in Adrian's gray eyes softened into a slow smile. "Thursday works." Ethan turned and started walking backward for 2 steps. 7:30. "I will be there." Ethan faced forward again, smiling to himself. This time Adrian had not rescued him from anything, and Ethan was not searching for someone to repair an empty place. He simply wanted to see Adrian again. For the first time, that difference made possibility feel exciting instead of frightening. Thursday night changed the rhythm between Ethan and Adrian because nothing dramatic happened, and that was exactly what Ethan needed. Ethan arrived at the Greenwich Village restaurant 10 minutes early and found himself smiling when Adrian entered at exactly 7:30. "You are punctual," Ethan said. "You sound disappointed." "I expected at least one mysterious delay involving powerful people." Adrian removed his dark wool coat. "I disappoint people regularly." "I have heard." Dinner became 2 hours of ordinary conversation. Ethan learned that Adrian disliked decorative pillows because he considered them furniture without a purpose. Adrian discovered that Ethan researched restaurant menus before making reservations and still changed his order at the last second. They talked about work, New York winters, terrible coffee, and places they wanted to visit. No one mentioned rescue. No one discussed what Ethan had survived. For one evening, Ethan was simply a man, enjoying dinner with another man whose company he had chosen. Outside, recent rain reflected the Greenwich Village lights across the sidewalk. Adrian glanced toward the street. "I can have a car here in 5 minutes." Ethan looked sideways at him. Is that an offer or an order? Adrian answered immediately. An offer. Then I choose walking. Walking it is. Several blocks later, Adrian stopped at an intersection. There is a housing foundation gala next month. Ethan waited. Would you like to attend with me? With you? Ethan asked. Or is something belonging to you? Adrian's expression became serious. With me. Ethan smiled. Then yes. 1 month later, Ethan entered the Midtown Ballroom alone. The first sight of the chandeliers made an old memory rise unexpectedly, but it no longer controlled his breathing. Some of the guests had attended the canceled ceremony. Ethan recognized their faces and, more importantly, recognized that he no longer needed to interpret their expressions. Then he saw Ryan across the room. For 1 second, the past seemed to stand directly in front of him. Ryan gave him a small, respectful nod. Ethan returned it. No anger, no longing, no unfinished argument. Just acknowledgement. When Ethan looked away, he found Adrian on the opposite side of the ballroom, surrounded by several guests. Adrian had already noticed him, yet he did not cross the room. He did not summon Ethan with a gesture or assume where Ethan wanted to stand. He waited. Conversations continued around Ethan as he looked across the distance separating them. Months earlier, he had walked through another ballroom while everyone watched him approach an empty place. Tonight, there was no empty place waiting to define him. Ethan began walking. Guests moved naturally aside as he crossed the room. Adrian remained still until Ethan stopped several feet away. Then Adrian extended an open hand between them without closing the distance. Would you like to stand with me? He asked. Ethan noticed several nearby guests watching. Once, their attention would have felt like judgment. Now it was only attention. He looked at Adrian's waiting hand, then at the man himself. Adrian was powerful enough to command almost any room he entered. Yet from their first meeting, he had never treated Ethan's choices as something he was entitled to command. Ethan smiled and stepped forward. Yes, he took his place beside Adrian because that was where he wanted to be. Adrian's hand lowered without claiming anything more than Ethan had offered. Someone nearby resumed speaking, and gradually the room returned to normal. Ethan looked across the ballroom toward the doors he had entered alone. The strange symmetry almost made him laugh. The first time he had crossed a crowded room by himself, he had been trying to survive someone else's decision. This time he had crossed it because he had made his own. Later that evening, Ethan stepped onto the terrace outside the ballroom and rested his hands against the cool railing. Manhattan stretched below him in thousands of lights, while the conversations behind the glass faded into a distant murmur. A moment later, the terrace door opened. Adrian stopped several feet away. Do you want company? Ethan smiled at the familiar question. Yes. Adrian joined him at the railing without moving any closer than necessary. For a while, neither man spoke. Ethan finally looked at him. Why me? Adrian's expression shifted. That question has several possible meanings. Then answer the difficult one. Why did you choose me? Adrian considered his words before speaking. The first time I noticed you, you had every reason to disappear through a service elevator. Instead, you walked into a room full of people and told them the truth. Ethan looked toward the skyline. I was terrified. Courage and fear are not opposites. Adrian continued. But that was only the first impression. Then you challenged me when I was wrong. You said no without apologizing for it. You refused to let my reputation decide what you thought of me. And when you wanted dinner, you asked me yourself. Ethan laughed softly. The dinner invitation made the list. Very high on the list. The humor faded into comfortable silence. Ethan glanced through the glass toward the ballroom. Somewhere inside was Ryan, along with several people who had watched Ethan walk. Alone through another elegant room months earlier. When Ryan came back, Ethan said, I thought taking him back might change what that day meant. I wanted everyone who saw me standing there to eventually think it was only a mistake with a happy ending. Adrian listened, but I did not want to erase it anymore. I would never choose to live through it again, but it taught me something I should have understood long before. What? Ethan turned toward him. Being wanted and having value are not the same thing. Adrian's gray eyes remained on his. No, they are not. Ethan smiled. You know what is strange? Everyone would probably tell this story like you were the reversal. The terrifying Alpha showed up and chose the abandoned Omega. Adrian's eyebrow lifted. That sounds unnecessarily dramatic. You have met yourself, correct? Adrian almost smiled. Ethan continued, but you were not the reversal. I was. For once, Adrian had no immediate answer. Ethan looked back at the skyline. I stopped waiting for someone else's choice to tell me what I was worth. Adrian nodded slowly. Then I am glad I waited. They left the gala 20 minutes later. Adrian's car was available, but Ethan chose to walk several blocks through Midtown first. Recent rain had turned the pavement into reflections of white, amber, and red lights. At an intersection, the pedestrian signal changed to red. They stopped beneath a street lamp. Adrian looked at Ethan, then slowly extended one open hand between them. He did not touch him. He simply waited. Ethan stared at that hand and remembered another morning when he had waited for an Alpha to arrive so his future could begin. This was different. Nobody was late. Nobody was rescuing him. Nobody was deciding what happened next. Ethan placed his hand into Adrian's. Adrian's fingers closed gently around his without pulling him closer. The signal changed. They stepped in a crosswalk together, moving at the same pace. Ethan did not know exactly what their lives would look like 5 years from now. And for the first time, uncertainty did not frighten him. Adrian was not leading him toward a future already decided. Ethan was not following. They were. Simply walking beside each other, two men choosing the same direction, one step at a time.